Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to have you here with us for our session, The Skills They Need, Tools and Resources to Accelerate the Development of Skills and Dispositions in our learners. And I'm John Vanderels. I'm a director with the New Hampshire Learning Initiative. I've been engaged in what we call the work study practices for over 5 years now at this point, both as a principal and as a director with the New Hampshire Learning Initiative. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Paul Leather and Ellen Hume-Howard, and they'll introduce themselves here in a second. But what we'd like to ask you to do in the chat is just to introduce yourself, where you're from, what organization you're with, and also what interested you to join our session today. And I'm going to turn things over now to Paul, and he's going to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. I'm Paul Leather. I'm with the Center for Innovation and Education. And you may ask why I'm here with John and Ellen. It's because I actually live in Concord, New Hampshire, and I'm the former Deputy Commissioner at the New Hampshire Department of Education and work with both John and Ellen in their previous lives and then their current lives working on work study practices. Ellen, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ellen Hume-Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Learning Initiative, and I've been involved with the work study practices in a lot of different capacities, first as a district level administrator and serving on the New Hampshire's department's committee for the development of the work study practices, and also being a teacher reader for the Skills and Dispositions framework, which we've leaned on as we've been doing the work in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Paul and Ellen. I'd like to point you, as you introduce yourselves in the chat, to a document that I put in the chat as well. It's a PDF of our slides, which we will be using today just to frame our conversation. Within those slides, you'll see some links to two documents that we'll be using today during our session. The first one is a reflection document, and we'd like to actually utilize that document as kind of an ongoing resource for you to reflect based upon what you're hearing and what you find interesting, or maybe some questions that you might have. And when we get through kind of sharing our story of the work study practices, we're going to go back to that document and really use that to structure our waiting room. The other document that we really want to take a close look at is the resource document. So as the title suggests, there are a number of resources that we think you'll find interesting. So within our slides, again, you can find that resource document. One of the things we'll also do is put direct links in the chat to these documents as well, so that you have easy access to them. This resource document represents compilation of blog posts, articles, resources, the Essential Skills and Dispositions Framework, which we'll talk a little bit about in just a couple of minutes, and other things that you may find interesting to really frame the work that you might be doing in your world related to these 21st century competencies. They're called many different things: skills and dispositions, work habits, habits of learning. Business and industry may refer to them as soft skills, but in New Hampshire, our journey to really integrate these skills into curriculum instruction and assessment has evolved significantly over the course of the past 5 years or so, and we'd like to share that story with you.
Great, thanks, John. And I think over the next several slides, each of us are going to kind of talk about where we sat in the system as it evolved here in New Hampshire, and talk about some of our learnings from that process. So as I mentioned earlier, I was at the State Department for a number of years, probably more years than the age of some of the folks on this call. But we learned some things as we started to go into competency education and what would help from the state level that would help support this work. So the first thing we learned is that it's really important to create enabling conditions that that it's very difficult for educators at in an individual school or district to really innovate if they aren't really given permission and enabled, if you will, to do that. And so in New Hampshire, we um, uh, started down a road of competency education since before the turn of the century. And by 2005, our regulations actually expected high schools to be involved in competency education. And by 2014, it was K through 12. We knew that that wouldn't mean that everyone would be all the way there, but they recognized that it was something that was out there and an expectation to move in that direction. The next point that we really learned is that we needed to foster a culture of innovation. We needed to listen as to what was working and what wasn't working. And in our initial work with competency education, we felt like we kept hearing that we had focused perhaps too much on academics, but not enough on essential skills and dispositions. And so we started working with teachers, as Ellen mentioned, to start to identify what those essential skills and dispositions might be for our state. And we also recognized that we needed to learn to listen to what was emerging nationally. And we joined the Chief State School Officers Innovation Lab Network. And out of that came our work around establishing an accountability system that would support competency education, something we call PACE, or Performance Assessment of Competency Education. And we also got involved in learning progressions for math and for English language arts. But we also met with David Conley, who had a big bet that he could create a learning progression system for essential skills and dispositions, which resulted in the essential skills and dispositions framework. We also recognized that we needed to create supportive structures and frankly, cover for local innovators. And so we brought in local teachers to build those skills, as I mentioned it, and Sarah Lynch, who had led the David Conley's team to create the Essential Skills and Dispositions framework, met remotely with our New Hampshire educators as they built that system. And we also knew that we needed public will, including legislative support. And initially, they didn't see the value of essential skills and dispositions, but they saw the value of something called work-study practices. And so we established what we called work-study practices, but based it and built it upon the framework of essential skills and dispositions. And then when we saw that folks were kind of getting stuck, we recognized at the state level that if we gave a little push that would include some incentives, when the field was ready, that would help. And so we challenged 3 New Hampshire superintendents to advance personalized learning. And that's when I first met Ellen and Jonathan Vanderels. John at that time was a principal at Memorial Elementary, and he started advancing these skills in classrooms with his teachers, and started a whole learning process that he's now extended across the state. And then lastly, we recognized that we needed a deeper infrastructure. We needed to create an infrastructure that included intermediary organizations. And so we formed New Hampshire Learning Initiative. John was our first CEO, and he joined the Assessment for Learning effort. And Ellen then became the CEO after she retired from Sanborn School District, and has continued bringing in grants and other supports to support this work, including a grant with Hewlett, Jobs for the Future, and New Hampshire Learning Initiative.
Thank you, Paul. So he's passing the baton to the district level. As a district level leader, the work study practices in New Hampshire were really pretty easy for districts to get to. They are communication, collaboration, self-direction, and creativity. And I think those 4 key work study practices that reflect David Conley's work and the skills and dispositions framework came at the right time for districts. Many districts starting to do portrait of a graduate and identifying these similar ideas of what successful graduates would look like, what successful learners would look like. And I think as a district leader, what we were hearing from our teachers as we were doing competency-based education was that we had all these fantastic ideas and all these high expectations. We had a lot of focus and coherence and rigor around what we wanted students to be able to do. But we recognized, the teachers did, that students weren't ready. They weren't independent. They weren't setting goals for themselves. And so for many teachers, there was a reckoning that these personal skills, these success habits were truly at the foundation of how successful students were going to be in a competency-based system. And as a district leader, what that meant was taking that charge from teachers when they had this recognition and trying to prioritize how those skills and dispositions were going to play out in a district lens. The first one being, what's the readiness to build structures that support instructional shifts around these? Looking at the kind of professional development we did in our district, keeping the work study practices at the forefront, talking about when planning units, planning lessons, prioritizing those, using those as check-in points for our principals who were observing teachers to ask whether or not teachers had done some planning and instruction for students to be self-directed. What did that look like? So the whole idea of the structures, came right down into what teachers should be prioritizing when they were being observed. Also being proactive about policies, looking at how we would assess these skills and dispositions, how we would provide feedback to students about these skills and dispositions, but not grade them, and how we would separate them from academics so the competency grade would be clear. These are all district-wide proactive policies that needed to be put in place to clear the way for these skills and dispositions to have a good fit in the instructional model. We didn't want them to be treated like academic pieces. We wanted them to be treated on a progression, as Paul mentioned, and based on students' individual development of these skills and their awareness of themselves as learners. We also looked at the ways in which we could make sure that everything we did within the district integrated this thinking. Real learning opportunities. When students went to CTE, what they did in their extended learning opportunities, all the different types of learning pathways. We, as a district, prioritizing them, talking about the district-wide. The other piece is district level commitment to collecting evidence. This involves a lot of student reflection, a lot of collaborative discussions with students about where they are at all levels, kindergarten through grade 12, and making sure that those discussions were happening and that teachers were able to collect some evidence of what they were doing and how it was impacting learners. Messaging at the district level, the importance of student voice, because what comes with my ability to be self-directed is my ability to have student agency, my ability to want to be a part of co-designing what I learn and what it looks like. And so being able to encourage teachers to be receptive to how, as kids grow in their own understanding of themselves as learners, and as they become more confident, what are the next opportunities that we can offer them? And then really helping teachers have professional development that supports those goals and student agency. John?
Thank you, Ellen. And so I'm just going to back up again about 5 or 6 years. When I was a principal in an elementary school in New Hampshire, and we had been part of the PACE project, which for those of you who don't know, performance assessment, competency education, was the first in the nation waiver to think outside of the box about assessment. And Paul Leather, as the deputy commissioner at the time, recognized the critical importance of these non-academic competencies, things like communication, collaboration, creativity, and self-direction. You'll see in your resource page that we have linked the Essential Skills and Dispositions framework, that framework that was developed by Sarah Lynch, and Fukada and Anderson that was developed through EPIC with through David Conley's work. And that document really became the foundation for how we were thinking about the research framework for how we were thinking about those competencies like communication, collaboration, creativity, and self-direction, which just happened to align with New Hampshire's work study practices. And so as we've continued to do over the past 5 years, we really started with teachers in the classroom. And I'll share that in my lens at the beginning was really how did we capture evidence of this? And it was kind of through a grading lens, which in hindsight was the wrong way to really look at this. What we saw very quickly, and there were two specific classrooms, one was a 5th grade classroom, one was a 1st grade classroom, in which the teachers were explicitly integrating instructionally things like how to collaborate effectively, what self-directed practices looked like. And what we saw was that metacognition, which is very, very heavily focused on within the essential skills and dispositions, was really a lever for students being able to understand where they were, and then very importantly, how to move forward and what that monitoring and adapting might look like. And so within our schools, we really allowed this innovation to happen naturally. We asked teachers to kind of just dig into it and see what they were finding. And so although we went in with kind of an intent of capturing evidence of what these looked like, we were also open to the learning that was going to happen naturally within classrooms. And so that first bullet, innovation must be allowed to happen, is really around that. We couldn't go in with thinking like this is the way we're going to do it, because quite honestly, this hadn't been done before, at least not to our knowledge or what we understood. So we went in leaning on teachers who are interested in this to really help us develop our understanding of that. And we were very patient. We talked a lot about different roles, and the roles of the teacher, the student, the parent, the principal, as Ellen alluded to, the curriculum side of things. And what we really found was that within any situation, we could, hold on one second, please. Within any situation, we really could determine for kids the best way for them to move forward. And quite honestly, what happened there is that our teachers started to learn together. They started to share that learning together. And it was a situation that allowed our learning to really grow significantly. That communication up and down the chain is absolutely imperative. And we wanted to make sure that at the classroom level, we were able to support teachers in our roles as a principal or as a district level person. And then also, Paul as a deputy commissioner and Ginny Berry as our commissioner were very interested in supporting our teachers in their roles as well. So that communication was critical. We had teachers, as I said, that were very willing to push the envelope, so to speak. And when they were doing that, we were fortunate to learn from them. And those teachers, quite honestly, didn't go in with a preconceived notion about what their learning was really going to look like. And so we were in a place where we really could learn from them. We also recognized that the learning wasn't just happening right within the classrooms in our own schools. And so Paul had approached me while I was a principal and asked if I was interested in leading almost like a community of practice around the work study practices throughout the state. It was something I was very interested in because I could see this is a leverage point to learning. And as a competency-based system, this was a significant focus, a design principle within a competency-based system, that separation of academics and behaviors, and that we were holding these types of competencies to a high standard as well. So we started to share outside of our schools, and those opportunities only continued to evolve and have continued to evolve to this day. For example, we created a learning community that had a work study practices symposium at the end of the year. And what we did is it was about 6 schools at that time. We had teachers that were trying different things in their classrooms, and we pulled them all together. we started to share those practices in ways that allowed the teachers who were interested in those things to really dig in even more deeply and learn from each other. Within schools, we started to think about scale as well. And so in our school, for example, we had those 2 classrooms who were really focusing on the work study practices, and we knew we needed to help other teachers in our school really learn more about it. And so I, as a principal, had to think about ways that we could push the learning of others. And the way we did that was through the teachers who were doing that work. We had them sharing their practices. And once they did that and other teachers saw with their own eyes kind of the way that kids were responding, it took care of itself. Teachers wanted to engage in that. So opportunities to share learning both within the school and outside of the school are important and should be explored. And then as Ellen really talked about that shift from grading, when we think about assessment, a lot of times we think of the word test. And I can say this, in the New Hampshire, at the New Hampshire Learning Initiative and within this work study practices work in New Hampshire, our understanding of assessment has changed dramatically, really, especially as it relates to these work study practices. Assessment is really for learning, and in many cases as learning. So instead of just of learning, we're really looking at assessment and students being very much involved in that assessment process through that metacognitive process. So they're being asked to reflect in very meaningful ways. And then they're asked to set goals and monitor and adapt those goals. And that's part of that learning process. So there's been this explicit shift away from grading as a punitive means to assessment for learning and as learning. And then again, instruction of these competencies, we learned that very quickly. We went in through an assessment, or really a grading lens, and we learned that it really, the growth happened based upon the instruction of these important skills and dispositions, asking students to reflect and set goals, but also talking openly about what it looked like to be an effective collaborator. And so those things had a dramatic effect on both what was happening in the classroom, but also what we were learning about things as a whole. As we said earlier, I then moved out of the school and had the opportunity to support many more schools around this type of work, and to help support teachers and principals in deepening this work at the school level and in the classroom level. And since that time, that has only expanded. Some of the resources we shared specific to BEST, which is building essential skills for today, have really taken things to the next level. So when you look at that resource document, you'll see self-direction rubrics, you'll see we have collaboration rubrics in the works, but they're really more like learning progressions. And that's the intent of the essential skills and dispositions, but they were progressions of learning. So again, it's not about every student should be in this particular place, but really understanding where each student is and helping them understand better what they need to do to move forward. So we're going to review some of our new learnings based upon, this process that's happened, and some of those major pieces. What we'd ask you to do as we're going through these is to really think about what resonates with you. Where are you, depending upon your role, where are you in this process? What really jumps out at you as something that you'd like to learn more about, or something that you think you can really use as a foundational piece in your work to deepen the essential skills and dispositions, these work study practices in your environment? And when we kind of get through this, we're going to loop back around to that particular piece, because ultimately we want you to be able to connect what we're sharing here to your world. So assessment for and as learning. Again, I shared that when I came in, it was more through the lens of how do we capture this to report out to parents, to report out to students. But the important thing is really assessment as a feedback process, part of the learning process. Again, Design Principle 7 explicitly states that these competencies are going to be held in high regard. They're just as important in preparing students to be successful in the outside world as these academic competencies. So how are we really allowing students to practice these? And then metacognition as a lever. I don't think I can really stress this piece enough. Thinking about thinking and just the process in a safe environment. So culture is important here. The process of allowing students to think about how they can get better at something, what they can do to improve, where they are, where they want to be. And then the teacher really acting as more of a coach, and helping to support that student in his or her learning. The metacognitive pieces that we've seen in the classrooms that have been successful are very explicit. Students are asked to reflect on a consistent basis. They reflect with each other, which is really important. So you have these opportunities for students to really think about where they are, think about where they want to go, and then set a plan in action to try to get there. And I'll share a quick story related to this. In our school, we had fifth graders, and Paul will remember this, and Ellen will remember this, because we were visited by the U.S. Education Department. And as we always tried to do, we put students in front of them, and there was no agenda. We just basically asked them to talk about their learning. And what was very clear is that these students understood where they were as learners and what they were trying to do. So there's a high level of metacognitive practice that was evident within these students. Random sampling of the class, students at all different levels, academically, socially, and emotionally, being able to talk about what they were struggling with, what their strengths were. And as a principal, when I was going into those classrooms, I knew there was something different, but I couldn't put my finger on it for a while. And when I finally did, I realized it was their level of metacognition, what they understood about themselves as learners, and how they were able to apply that. This third bullet, symmetry matters. What we really mean by that is that when we started this process, we wanted to lean on teachers as kind of this foundational piece of the learning. And so teachers were both engaging in the process, but also sharing out what they were learning. And we thought that by through living that process, that would impact classrooms. And we were right. But very importantly, teachers were learning from students. And I think that's especially represented within the BEST work that's happening, the Building Essential Skills for Today work, that really relies on student voice. Ellen mentioned this earlier, but the student voices and how students are engaged in this process. They're co-designing what this process looks like, and that we're listening to students as we make these changes in our processes, so that learning between teacher and student, and really between the classroom, so teachers and students and us, is working in symmetry. So it's a very critical piece in what we've learned thus far.
So point number 4, one of the things about leading change and leading system change and doing things like reprioritizing for teachers, these types of skills in their lessons, is that if you really need, as a leader, as a school leader, as a teacher leader, as a district leader, you really need to have some resilience, because things are going to come around, and when you get tired, you're going to make compromises, and you can't do that here. One of them is that it's very easy in doing work study practices or the skills and dispositions or success habits. Districts have them as acronyms that are part of their portrait or part of their accreditation process. Do not let these skills become graded. You have to hold the line on feedback for learning. You have to recognize that all the mistakes we've made in grading, we don't want to apply to these skills, because they're personal, because they're about students themselves, about how they see themselves. And so as a leader, protecting against that, making sure you don't get your attention off of that, and just making sure that it's always at the forefront, and that kids are talking about this learning. Ultimately, there are 2 school districts in New Hampshire that I think have really taken this to the level that is pretty impressive. Both Epping and Laconia actually have students give themselves their own feedback in the reporting process that goes home to parents. It's ultimately the students who reflect metacognitively on where they are in the process. And that becomes part of the reporting system. I think that's ultimately one of the most positive things we've seen as this has evolved. The other piece is that, in a truly authentic competency-based system, if you're really making this shift, there's a shared urgency that happens when you realize that kids aren't ready. Sometimes you need a secret decoder ring to find out what this is. Teachers will say things like, kids aren't doing the work. They're not making the effort. All the different excuses that they have for why students aren't performing, and your ability as a leader to translate that and say, well, what should we do about that? And could it be that we need to do more around, we all have this, we all want kids to be successful. And so one thing that all teachers have in common, no matter what discipline they teach, is that they all want kids to be self-directed. So it's a shared urgency. It's a way to move the system forward if you can redirect their feelings about kids' performance in ways that are positive. And really, at the book that Don't Work Harder Than Your Students, I often talk about that with teachers. It's true, right? That kids, this is going to take work for kids to be more self-directed, and that is okay. The other piece is leading with the skills themselves. You cannot assess students or give them feedback on things you haven't instructed, that you haven't drawn out and shown what examples would look like, what their next steps would be. It's actually malpractice to do that. So really keeping in your forefront of your mind and with your teachers and with your colleagues who you're working with that haven't really talked about what self-direction really needs to look like. What is quality collaborative work? Well, how does that look in math? How is it different in ELA? So really making sure that, one of the hallmarks of your planning and your units is that you really are talking about these skills, and that you're providing the kind of guidance you need for kids to actually learn and be part of the progression. Paul?
Yeah, I started talking and I had it on mute, so sorry about that. So as we start to think about the larger system and building a larger system that is truly competency-based, there are some things we've learned with the essential skills and dispositions, having some common definitions, knowing that some things are going to be different from educator to educator, school to school, district to district. If we have some common definitions and some shared understandings of those definitions, that can truly support a system that's competency-based, so that a student and students can feel a greater sense of agency within that system. And so having a process that will support both calibration of learning across the skills, as well as collaboration around building tasks and performance tasks that would support the essential skills and dispositions, is crucial to creating a larger system. We also have found, and I think many folks during remote learning have really seen, that having assessment systems that where student evidence is clear, as well as student reflection on their learning is an integral part of the process, really provides an ability to see how students are doing, particularly as we're trying to enhance and engage students in self-direction and metacognition. We also recognize, however, and so we know this is a complex process, that although we talk about common definitions and shared understandings, that context does matter, and that what might work best in one school or one district or one system might look different in another place as it's designed in that place. And so systems that require and are based on replication from one place to another, we found over time are not effective. We need to build this from the ground up, and we need to provide supports to folks as the system is built. And so that really requires us to think about an emergence process as opposed to a constructed process, a process by which things, new innovative practices can emerge. And if you do that, then building a system that's based on these essential skills and dispositions can rise out of the ashes, if you will, of the old style of teaching and learning that we're all so familiar with. And then lastly, to really support this, the role of the state education agency really needs to be very different. The SEA needs to support innovators in the field, to recognize them and to support them, and to create enabling conditions so that they can thrive, including building policies and kind of protective structures so that they can really build something that they can share with others and can advance the larger system. So with that, John, I think we can move to the next slide.
Thanks, Paul. So what we'd like to do now is actually have, we're going to take a look at this document quickly and just give you all an opportunity to share your thinking, something that you've heard today. And we appreciate the ongoing discussion in the chat. There's been some interesting kind of insights in there, but we'd like to try to capture this within this particular document. Again, it's a reflection document. Lauren has put that into the chat itself. And if you could all, we see some people getting in now, but if you could get into that and just take a few minutes to respond in the document about what you've heard over the past 35 minutes or so that is resonating with you. Maybe you still have a question on. Also could be like how you're looking at this in your own environment. So it could be your state, the district you're in, the school, or maybe an organization that you're working for. What does it look like in your environment? Because I think one of the greatest things about these types of opportunities is sharing learning. So we've kind of come in to start this conversation, but ultimately we really want you to share your learning as well, so we can learn from all of you. So this will kind of frame the breakout room conversation that we're going to have in just a couple minutes. So again, take a couple minutes just to respond here in this document. And then Lauren is going to put us into breakout rooms for probably around 12 minutes or so, which will allow us time to come back at about 10 of, and really we'll report out by breakout room and think about what next steps might be. Importantly, and some of you are already putting this in there, how might you use what you've learned going forward? What might that look like? What do we all need to be considering? This is just our perspective from our work in New Hampshire. And we've had the opportunity over the past couple of years to really learn from others in this regard through the assessment for learning project work, as well as the best work combined with the jobs for the future. So thank you to those who are filling this out already. And Lauren, when you're ready, if you could place us into those breakout rooms, that would be wonderful.
Hi, Deb. Everyone is in breakout rooms right now, so I am going to go ahead and place you in one of those. Give me just one moment.
Thank you.
I think we might have everybody back here. Is that right, Lawrence?
That's correct, yes.
Great. So I know in our breakout, we had about 5 of us. What we'd like to do very quickly is just report out kind of high points from our breakout session, what the conversation entailed. And we'll start with our breakout. I think Joey was going to report out for us. So Joey, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, so our team, we had kind of 3 threads throughout our discussion. The first was the importance of leadership. Innovation is, it's quite challenging for innovation to occur without the door being opened by leadership, something we heard about earlier in the session, and that continued support for innovation throughout. That being the first thread. The second is the culture of the institution itself, which of course is tied to leadership. There needs to be a supporting culture and a groundswell of a culture of innovation, of thinking differently, of pushing against the box. And then the third, which is perhaps unique to this time, is the idea of external stakeholder approval. You can have your student body, your faculty, your leadership all aligned with a vision towards students or learner-centered education. And then you still might have challenges with parents or community members. So it's almost, as Dave had said, we're trying to teach 2 generations at once. And so those were the 3 threads that came out of our group.
Joey, thank you. That's great. And I think just something to think about when you went back to Ellen's, if you go back to Ellen's slide on the state level, I'm sorry, the district level, she talked about the portrait of a learner. And what we found, and we didn't talk about this a whole lot, but what we found was that by starting with that and bringing in that that community and parent voice, it does help because ultimately the competencies that through a portrait of a learner, portrait of a graduate that are going to come out oftentimes are these communication skills, collaboration, the ability to persevere and be self-directed, those, and to think outside of the box. So that creativity piece is referenced as well. Paul and Ellen, do you mind, or maybe someone from your group is willing to share as well, but we can go to that group next.
Sure, John. Mindy and Rachel were with Ellen and I, and I'll just say that we spent some time talking about state policies and how it's important that they both follow this work and support and enable this work. And we talked about ways that we could find to make that happen. I did mention that Aurora is having a session for policy folks, including legislators, state legislators, on the 13th of November. And if you want to know more about that and maybe engage some of your legislators or policymakers in that conversation, you might reach out to Susan Patrick or even let us know, and we can help you with that. And then we also talked about skills and dispositions and what each state, we're talking about Texas and Washington and what they are doing in regards to moving forward with these skills and dispositions. But I'd ask Ellen or Mindy or Rachel, do you have anything to add to what I just shared?
Sounds perfect to me, Paul.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, who's next?
Thank you so much. So we have another group. I think we had a few folks in there that we might know. And Kathy, I think Kathy White, you might have been part of that. Would you be comfortable sharing what your group discussed?
Sure. We kind of traversed through the conversation on a couple of different topics, but I think what we were, to summarize, we were looking at what professional development opportunities might help to be able to scale work. Another question was, how do you scale this work? And we talked about, you find your early adopters, the people who really believe in this. And then you can bring along, you begin to build evidence and enthusiasm, and then you can bring along other groups of people. And that might be at all different levels in the system. And then I think that we talked about, sometimes it's hard to keep consistency within a system that's as large as a state. And so how do you build in that consistency when there might be moving parts in terms of personnel or resources? So that's a really big question.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Ellen, Paul, and I want to thank you all for just your engagement during that particular portion. I know for our breakout room, just hearing how others are approaching this and what they're thinking about is helpful. And there's some great points brought up. I'm going to turn things over to Ellen. She's going to talk about the resource document quickly as we wrap things up here.
Thank you. It's been great being with everyone. We've tried to put into that resource document a lot of different history that represents the journey of our work, where we have teacher voice, student voice, administrative voice, but also some of the resources and tools that we've had available that we've used. And we'll keep adding to this resource as we develop more. I would really recommend you spend some time on the BEST site. It's at its beginnings, but we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on the rubrics that were developed for self-direction, and our teachers, along with the experts working with them, continue to build rubrics out for the other 3 skills and dispositions of work study practices in New Hampshire. So keep checking back, because you'll see some other resources there. And as you know, when teachers create resources, they're like gold. Other teachers love them. So definitely tap into those. So and just contact us. Let us know if you need anything.
Thanks, Ellen. Paul, any last thoughts before we kind of wrap things up?
No, I just would like to thank everybody for joining us, and know that this is a work in progress. We continue to learn, and we continue to learn from all of you. So let's keep up the dialogue, and let's keep working on essential skills and dispositions going forward. It's at the center of the work of competency education.
Yeah, it sure is. And I'm just going to leave with just sharing a comment that a teacher and a principal team asked me last week. They said, "Where do we start? We just want to figure out where to start." And my response to them is, you have to start somewhere. And it's about entry points. And so just thinking about this work and trying something in the classroom, which is the approach we've used, we've found to have incredible benefits to kids, most importantly, but also to our learning. So figure out where the best starting point is for you, and then you learn from there. Be open to the learning from there. Folks, we want to thank you all for joining us, and we wish you the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep the learning going. Take care, everybody.
Stay in touch.
Bye-bye.